Section 43 of Villette by Charlotte Bronte. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Leanne Fortune, Section 43. By nature, he was a feeler and a thinker. Over his emotions and his reflections spread a mellowing of melancholy. More than a mellowing. In trouble and bereavement it became a cloud. He did not know much about Lucy Snowe. What he knew, he did not very accurately comprehend. Indeed, his misconceptions of my character often made me smile, but he saw my walk in life lay rather on the shady side of the hill. He gave me credit for doing my endeavour to keep the course honestly straight. He would have helped me if he could. Having no opportunity of helping, he still wished me well. When he did look at me, his eye was kind. When he did speak, his voice was benevolent. "Yours," said he, "is an arduous calling. I wish you health and strength to win in it. Success." His fair little daughter did not take the information quite so composedly. She fixed on me a pair of eyes wide with wonder, almost with dismay. "Are you a teacher?" cried she. Then, having paused on the unpalatable idea, "Well, I never knew what you were, nor ever thought of asking. For me, you were always Lucy Snowe." "And what am I now?" I could not forbear inquiring. "Yourself, of course. But do you really teach here in Villette?" "I really do." "And do you like it?" "Not always." "And why do you go on with it?" Her father looked at, and I feared, was going to check her, but he only said, "Proceed, Polly, proceed with that catechism. Prove yourself the little wiseacre you are. If Miss Snowe were to blush and look confused, I should have to bid you hold your tongue, and you and I would sit out the present meal in some disgrace. But she only smiles, so push her hard, multiply the cross questions. Well, Miss Snowe, why do you go on with it?" "Chiefly, I fear, for the sake of the money I get." "Not, then, from motives of pure philanthropy?" Polly and I were clinging to that hypothesis as the most lenient way of accounting for your eccentricity. "No, no, sir. Rather for the roof of shelter I am thus enabled to keep over my head, and for the comfort of mind it gives me to think that while I can work for myself, I am spared the pain of being a burden to anybody." "Papa, say what you will, I pity Lucy." "Take up that pity, Mr. Bassompierre. Take it up in both hands, as you might a little callow gosling squattering out of bounds without leave. Put it back in the warm nest of a heart whence it issued, and receive in your ear this whisper. If my Polly ever came to know by experience the uncertain nature of this world's goods, I should like her to act as Lucy acts, to work for herself, that she might burden neither kith nor kin." "Yes, papa," said she, pensively and tractably. "But poor Lucy, I thought she was a rich lady, and had rich friends." "You thought like a little simpleton. I never thought so. When I had time to consider Lucy's manner and aspect, which was not often, I saw she was one who had to guard and not be guarded, to act and not be served, and this lot has, I imagine, helped her to an experience for which, if she live long enough to realize its full benefit, she may yet bless Providence. But the school," he pursued, changing his tone from grave to gay, "would Madame Beck admit my Polly, do you think, Miss Lucy?" I said they needed but to try Madame. It would soon be seen. She was fond of English pupils. "If you, sir," I added, "will but take Mr. Bassompierre in your carriage this very afternoon, I think I can answer for it that Rosine, the portress, will not be very slow in answering your ring, and Madame, I am sure, will put on her best pair of gloves to come into the salon to receive you." "In that case," responded Mr. Home, "I see no sort of necessity there is for delay. Mrs. Hurst can send what she calls her young ladies' things after her. Polly can settle down to her horn-book before night, and you, Miss Lucy, I trust, will not disdain to cast an occasional eye upon her, and let me know, from time to time, how she gets on. I hope you approve of the arrangement, Countess de Bassompierre?" The Countess hemmed and hesitated. "I thought," said she, "I thought I had finished my education." "That only proves how much we may be mistaken in our thoughts. I hold a far different opinion, as most of these will who have been auditors of your profound knowledge of life this morning. Ah, my little girl, thou hast much to learn, and papa ought to have taught thee more than he has done. Come, there is nothing for it but to try Madame Beck, and the weather seems settling, and I have finished my breakfast. But, papa—" "Well?" "I see an obstacle." "I don't at all." "It is enormous, papa. It can never be got over. It is as large as you in your greatcoat, and the snowdrift on the top." "And, like that snowdrift, capable of melting?" "No, it is of too solid flesh. It is just your own self. Miss Lucy, warn Madame Beck not to listen to any overtures about taking me, because in the end it would turn out that she would have to take papa too, as he is so teasing. I will just tell tales about him. Mrs. Bretton and all of you listen. About 5 years ago, when I was 12 years old, he took it into his head that he was spoiling me, that I was growing unfitted for the world, and I don't know what, and nothing would serve or satisfy him, but I must go to school. I cried, and so on, but Monsieur de Bassompierre proved hard-hearted, quite firm and flinty, and to school I went. What was the result? In the most admirable manner, papa came to school likewise. Every other day he called to see me. Madame Aigredoux grumbled, but it was of no use, and so at last papa and I were both, in a manner, expelled. Lucy can just tell Madame Beck this little trait. It is only fair to let her know what she has to expect." Mrs. Bretton asked Mr. Home what he had to say in answer to this statement. As he made no defence, judgment was given against him, and Paulina triumphed. But she had other moods besides the arch and naive. After breakfast, when the two elders withdrew, I suppose to talk over certain of Mrs. Bretton's business matters, and the Countess, Dr. Bretton, and I were for a short time alone together, all the child left her. With us, more nearly her companions in age, she rose at once to the little lady. Her very face seemed to alter, that play of feature and candour of look, which, when she spoke to her father, made it quite dimpled and round, yielded to an aspect more thoughtful, and lines distincter and less mobile. No doubt Graham noted the change as well as I. He stood for some minutes near the window, looking out at the snow. Presently he approached the hearth, and entered into conversation, but not quite with his usual ease. Fit topics did not seem to rise to his lips. He chose them fastidiously, hesitatingly, and consequently infelicitously. He spoke vaguely of Villette, its inhabitants, its notable sights and buildings. He was answered by Mr. Bassompierre in quite womanly sort, with intelligence, with a manner not indeed wholly disindividualized, a tone, a glance, a gesture, here and there, rather animated and quick than measured and stately, still recalled little Polly. But yet there was so fine and even a polish, so calm and courteous a grace, gilding and sustaining these peculiarities, that a less sensitive man than Graham would not have ventured to seize upon them as vantage points, leading to franker intimacy. Yet while Dr. Bretton continued subdued, and for him sedate, he was still observant. Not one of those petty impulses and natural breaks escaped him. He did not miss one characteristic movement, one hesitation in language, or one lisp in utterance. At times, in speaking fast, she still lisped, but coloured whenever such lapse occurred, and in a painstaking, conscientious manner, quite as amusing as the slight error, repeated the word more distinctly. Whenever she did this, Dr. Bretton smiled. Gradually, as they conversed, the restraint on each side slackened. Might the conference have but been prolonged, I believe it would soon have become genial. Already to Paulina's lip and cheek returned the wreathing, dimpling smile. She lisped once, and forgot to correct herself, and Dr. John, I know not how he changed, but change he did. He did not grow gayer. No raillery, no levity sparkled across his aspect, but his position seemed to become one of more pleasure to himself, and he spoke his augmented comfort in readier language, in tones more suave. 10 years ago this pair had always found abundance to say to each other. The intervening decade had not narrowed the experience or impoverished the intelligence of either. Besides, there are certain natures of which the mutual influence is such that the more they say, the more they have to say. For these out of association grows adhesion, and out of adhesion amalgamation. Graham, however, must go. His was a profession whose claims are neither to be ignored nor deferred. He left the room, but before he could leave the house there was a return. I am sure he came back, not for the paper or card in his desk, which formed his ostensible errand, but to assure himself by one more glance that Paulina's aspect was really such as memory was bearing away, that he had not been viewing her somehow by a partial artificial light and making a fond mistake. No, he found the impression true. Rather, indeed, he gained than lost by this return. He took away with him a parting look, shy but very soft, as beautiful, as innocent as any little fawn could lift out of its cover of fern, or any lamb from its meadow bed. Being left alone, Paulina and I kept silence for some time. We both took out some work, and plied a mute and diligent task. The whitewood workbox of old days was now replaced by one inlaid with precious mosaic, and furnished with implements of gold. The tiny and trembling fingers that could scarce guide the needle, though tiny still, were now swift and skilful, but there was the same busy knitting of the brow, the same little dainty mannerisms, the same quick turns and movements, now to replace a stray tress, and anon to shake from the silken skirt some imaginary atom of dust, some clinging fibre of thread. That morning I was disposed for silence. The austere fury of the winter day had on me an awing, hushing influence. That passion of January, so white and so bloodless, was not yet spent. The storm had raved itself hoarse, but seemed no nearer exhaustion. Had Ginevra Fanshawe been my companion in that drawing-room, she would not have suffered me to muse and listen undisturbed. The presence just gone from us would have been her theme, and how she would have rung the changes on one topic! How she would have pursued and pestered me with questions and surmises, worried and oppressed me with comments and confidences I did not want and longed to avoid! Paulina Mary cast once or twice towards me a quiet but penetrating glance of her dark full eye. Her lips half opened, as if to the impulse of coming utterance, but she saw and delicately respected my inclination for silence. This will not hold long, I thought to myself, for I was not accustomed to find in women or girls any power of self-control or strength of self-denial. As far as I knew them, the chance of a gossip about their usually trivial secrets, their often very washy and paltry feelings, was a treat not to be readily foregone. The little Countess promised an exception. She sewed till she was tired of sewing, and then she took a book. As chance would have it, she had sought it in Dr. Bretton's own compartment of the bookcase, and it proved to be an old Breton book, some illustrated work of natural history, Often had I seen her standing at Graham's side, resting that volume on his knee, and reading to his tuition, and when the lesson was over, begging, as a treat, that he would tell her all about the pictures. I watched her keenly. Here was a true test of that memory she had boasted. Would her recollections now be faithful? Faithful, it could not be doubted. As she turned the leaves, over her face passed gleam after gleam of expression, the least intelligent of which was a full greeting to the past. And then she turned to the title page, and looked at the name written in the schoolboy hand. She looked at it long, nor was she satisfied with merely looking. She gently passed over the characters the tips of her fingers, accompanying the action with an unconscious but tender smile, which converted the touch into a caress. Paulina loved the past, but the peculiarity of this little scene was that she said nothing. She could feel without pouring out her feelings in a flux of words. She now occupied herself at the bookcase for nearly an hour, taking down volume after volume, and renewing her acquaintance with each. This done, she seated herself on a low stool, rested her cheek on her hand, and thought, and still was mute. The sound of the front door opened below, a rush of cold wind, and her father's voice speaking to Mrs. Bretton in the hall startled her at last. She sprang up. She was downstairs in 1 second. "Papa, papa, you are not going out?" "My pet, I must go into town." "But it is too cold, papa." And then I heard Monsieur de Bassompierre showing to her how he was well provided against the weather, and how he was going to have the carriage, and to be quite snugly sheltered, and in short proving that she need not fear for his comfort. "But you will promise to come back here this evening, before it is quite dark, you and Dr. Bretton both, in the carriage? It is not fit to ride." "Well, if I see the doctor, I will tell him a lady has laid on him her commands to take care of his precious health, and come home early under my escort." "Yes, you must say a lady, and he will think it is his mother, and be obedient. And, papa, mind to come soon, for I shall watch and listen." The door closed, and the carriage rolled softly through the snow, and back returned the Countess, pensive and anxious. She did listen and watch, when evening closed, but it was in stillest sort, walking the drawing-room with quite noiseless step. She checked at intervals her velvet march, inclined her ear, and consulted the night sounds. I should rather say the night silence, for now, at last, the wind was fallen. The sky, relieved of its avalanche, lay naked and pale. Through the barren boughs of the avenue we could see it well, and note also the polar splendor of the New Year moon, an orb white as a world of ice. Nor was it late when we saw also the return of the carriage. Paulina had no dance of welcome for this evening. It was with a sort of gravity that she took immediate possession of her father as he entered the room, but she at once made him her entire property, led him to the seat of her choice, and while softly showering round him honeyed words of commendation for being so good and coming home so soon, you would have thought it was entirely by the power of her little hands he was put into his chair, and settled and arranged, for the strong man seemed to take pleasure in wholly yielding himself to this dominion potent only by love. Graham did not appear till some minutes after the Count. Paulina half turned when his step was heard. They spoke, but only a word or two. Their fingers met a moment, but obviously with slight contact. Paulina remained beside her father. Graham threw himself into a seat on the other side of the room. It was well that Mrs. Bretton and Mr. Home had a great deal to say to each other, almost an inexhaustible fund of discourse in old recollections, otherwise I think our party would have been but a still one that evening. After tea, Paulina's quick needle and pretty golden thimble were busily plied by the lamplight, but her tongue rested, and her eyes seemed reluctant to raise often their lids, so smooth and so full-fringed. Graham, too, must have been tired with his day's work. He listened dutifully to his elders and betters, said very little himself, and followed with his eye the gilded glance of Paulina's thimble, as if it had been some bright moth on the wing, or the golden head of some darting little yellow serpent. End of section 43. Recording by Leanne Fortune.